This is Ken Forster, Executive Director at Momenta. Welcome to our Digital Thread podcast, produced by, for, and about digital industry leaders. In this series of conversations, we capture insights from the best and brightest minds in digital industry. They're executives, entrepreneurs, advisors, and other thought leaders. What they have in common is, like our team at Momenta, they are deep industry operators. We hope you find these podcasts informative, and as always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Good day and welcome to episode 143 of our Digital Thread podcast series. Today, it's my great pleasure to host Roberto Siagri, the founder and recent CEO of Eurotech, a global company that integrates hardware, software services, and expertise to deliver building blocks for full Internet of Things solutions. Roberto founded Eurotech in 1992, leading the business as CEO through its public listing in 2015, which was rated the best performing IPO in Europe for that year, and just recently handed over the reins to the next generation of leadership. Prior to Eurotech, Roberto already had a strong presence in ICT as CTO of HTE ASEM, now part of Rockwell. So Roberto, welcome to our Digital Thread podcast.
Thank you, Ken, for your introduction. Thank you for having me here.
I'm really glad to get you. You've been truly a pioneer in this space, and we'll talk about it in a moment through the questions we've got. But 30 years in the space, really pioneering this idea of ubiquitous computing, and so I'm looking forward to a great conversation. I always like to start off really asking the key question, what would you consider to be your digital thread? In other words, the one or more thematic threads that define your digital industry leadership.
Well, I can summarize it in this way: is the Wirth's law versus the Moore's law. In other way, the point that the software is getting slower much rapidly than the hardware is becoming faster. So it was a sort of thinking behind this concept and figuring out that at the end, the real problem is how to reduce the effort in software development and putting together the right combination of hardware and software tool in order to let the industry to be much faster in developing new application and also giving to them an easier way to maintain these things. If you think about the early 80s, well, there was not a lot of operating system around, and also the programming language, was a lot of assembler, not a lot of C. So the personal computer at that time was, to me, the right way to address this increase in demand for software and complexity of the software versus the way in which the hardware can solve this problem.
So in some sense, full stack, what I like to call edgeware, in the sense that software meets hardware completely at the edge, and this idea of really driving it toward, or let's say, fulfilling the promise of Moore's law through a combination of the software and hardware. And that clearly defines much of the digital industry space that we love so much. So you started this digital thread journey, joining HT ASEM as a hardware designer in 1986 and later serving as CTO. Interesting, I saw that Rockwell Automation recently acquired the company, and they claim to advance the digital edge, which is an interesting thought. What were some of the early digital edge projects that you did there at the time?
Well, at that time, it was more an effort in developing the PC hardware. We were in the early days of the chipset, so the glue logic that let Intel processor to become a personal computer, or to be a personal computer. So the effort was more in the hardware space. And to deal with frequency, it's funny to think about that, but at that time, the effort was how to move from 10 megahertz to 12 megahertz. So, and it looks funny because now we are talking about gigahertz. And I can tell you, if you have told me that we were now at the gigahertz in the gigahertz range. Well, I've told you that we were not in the radar industry, but it was a journey more on the hardware and how to deal with the increase in the frequency of this processor. And also a little bit about miniaturization, but miniaturization was not the real scope at that time. It was more to design reliable hardware for the office automation.
So you co-founded Eurotech in 1992, soon serving as CEO. What problem did you set out to solve, and really for whom?
Yes, that's the interesting thing. So during my time at ASEM, the point I have figured out that personal computer was just more than the office automation tool. It can become a great tool also for the industrial sector. But if you want to move the personal computer out of the office space and inside the industrial sector, then you have to start to miniaturize it. And the chipset and so the glue logic, in some way, the VLSI technology that was put in place in order to reduce the cost of the personal computer in the office space, it was helping the miniaturization on the other side. And I was returning back to my early ideas when I was in the university of this small personal computer for industrial applications. So the effort was how to reduce the size, but inside standards. I have discovered by myself that the industrial sector does not like proprietary things. Industrial sector required something that is standardized. And in the early 90s, the PC 104 consortium was started in the U.S. in California, and I take this kind of opportunity as the signal to start Eurotech. So the standard was there in terms of form factor. The technology was at the right point. And also the software tools were enough for solve a lot of industrial problem. And then I started with some colleagues Eurotech.
You make it sound so textbook, and I know there was certainly a lot of insight that went into choosing this space. Insight both clearly on the technology side, but also on the industrial use case side as well, and getting those to meet. In doing some research for this, I see that Wikipedia describes Eurotech's roots as pervasive and ubiquitous computing, which I got a kick out of. Today, of course, we like to talk about cloud, edge, mobile, etc. Are these simply new names, i.e. cloud and edge, for well-established computing patterns?
Okay, this is a great point. It's really a great point because the answer is yes and no. What I mean with this, if you look from the hardware perspective, it's not a big difference. Just because we are talking about embedded computers, small computer. The difference now we call edge because this embedded computer has to be always connected. And when the pervasive computing vision started, and pervasive ubiquitous computing vision started in the Xerox PARC, thanks to Mark Weiser in the 90s, the point was more on the miniaturization and how to solve simple tasks. No one has yet the idea of the complexity of the internet and the cybersecurity threat. So in reality, the difference between an embedded computer and an edge computer from the hardware point of view is more on the cybersecurity side. So the feature that let this computer to be more resilient against cybersecurity attack. But the big difference, so it's on the software layer. No one has envisioned the cloud. Tell you, I was also not in a position not to envision it because when in the middle of the 2000s, I was forcing the company to move inside this pervasive ubiquitous computing age. I have just the notion of not of the IoT as we know now, but I have the notion of the massive data platform, a platform that is able to collecting data. So this data collection platform that now we can also call data lake, but I have not the notion how we can realize this massive data collection platform. And we take years for understand that we have to get out of the old scheme of how software is developed and to move to the cloud. But for me, cloud is a new software paradigm, because behind the word cloud, you have the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. It's all these kind of layers and the methodology to develop this layer that has a big difference compared to the pervasive and ubiquitous computing vision of the early 2000s. So it's the cloud that has given to this concept the reality to become the reality, to become real and to be part of what we see nowadays around us as the IoT.
You guys were really a early leader in moving from pure hardware focus. I say pure hardware because there's always OS and embedded, but to something I think you called at the time the ESF, your service framework, really, which was sitting at that infrastructure as a service level. I remember in our early work on IoT platforms, Eurotech would constantly come up as a player and in some cases a leader in that space because of the early work that you guys had done. So I think you saw that vision probably more earlier than you give yourself credit for. But
yeah, that's something that happened. You know, is also the hype cycle from Gartner that talk about this. Sometimes you are so excited about a new idea, but from the idea to reality, yes, it takes time.
Yes, yeah, clearly. But you did begin that journey earlier, certainly earlier than most of your peer companies in the, I'll call it hardware module space on the industrial side. So let's talk about Eurotech particularly. What were some of your notable wins over your time there?
Yeah, well, returning back to what I have said about miniaturization, if you look at Eurotech from 92, 95, 97, in that 5 years, in the first 5 years, we were the first company that was able to miniaturize in a PC104 module the 486DX processor. Was not an easy task. Well, just to one that does not know, the PC104 form factor is a more or less a 10 by 10 centimeter. And if you think about the size of a PC1 of a 486DX, well, most of the space was just because of the processor. So it was not easy to put together all that kind of stuff. And we were really pushing the PCB technology and also the way in which you design the PCB at the limit in order to do that. And we were also the first company when the compact PCI standard emerged in the late 90s to come out with a Pentium processor in a 3U form factor, the Eurocard form factor. And but in general, what I can say is that was how we approach the standard, the customer with this modified standard, what it is called now MODS, modifier of the shelf, compared to the commercial of the shelf or the COTS product. So our way to manage COTS and MODS, it's maybe one of the key elements for our success. And then, of course, as you have mentioned, we were one of the leading company in transitioning from the operating system to a platform with the Internet of Things, understanding that the mobile phone industry was changing the rule in terms of how to develop software, and the app economy was entering inside the industrial space. In some way, you can think about IoT as the app economy entering in the industrial space. And then we have taken the international approach and the international expansion of the company. So a global company, but with a local approach.
I like that quote, IoT as the app economy into the industrial space. That's first time I think anybody's ever made that analogy, and I think it makes an awful lot of sense in that regard. Let's talk. You mentioned your really aggressive expansion. I think that's been a hallmark of Eurotech, going from quickly setting up a presence in the U.S., as we said earlier, driving the best performing IPO in Europe in 2005 and making 5 acquisitions along the way. What was your underlying expansion thesis?
Well, first of all, you have to follow the demand. And if you think about the demand, the largest economy at that time, but still today, were the US, then Japan, then you can question China and Japan, but for sure Japan. And then, of course, we have moved also in UK, France, and we just I have missed Germany. That is for sure now one of the most important one of the most innovative economy nowadays in the planet. But well, so we were following the market, and our technology was at the leading edge, and we need leading edge economy in order to be able to sell. So that's one way to look at the global expansion. And the other point that it's technology per se was led by, if you look at the microelectronics US, and if you look at the automated machine Japan, so that's the thesis about that 2 acquisition, and all the other is just to take advantage of a local presence with a global product line.
Global, let's say a global view, a local presence, and that probably pretty well defines how you guys always expanded, even though Euro is clearly in the name. Given your nearly 30 years at the helm of Eurotech, if you could go back and change anything, what might you have done differently?
A lot of things can. Unfortunately, you cannot reverse the clock. But let me say that we can say faster and slower. So what does it mean when I say faster and slower? As you have said before, sometimes we get too fast with some new idea on the market. And maybe, well, that's and not necessarily, well, not to follow too much knowing the hype cycle, not to follow too much the new trend, and maybe stay a little bit in stealth mode with some technologies, while to be much faster in taking decision about what it is not working. Sometimes, you postpone decision, but maybe because it's also related to the culture. If I am an American, maybe I was much faster. But because a European, maybe I'm not so fast. Matter of fact, I'm doing this acquisition around the world. You figure out a different kind of attitude. Japanese are slower in taking decision, but when they take the decision, they are very fast. Maybe the American culture is much faster in taking decision, and also the economy is much faster in terms of reaction. So learning a little bit from all these things, and then the other point maybe it is move myself in the US from the beginning instead to stay here. But well, it's that's so not big things, but some fundamental things. Yes, if I return back, if I'm able to return back, I would like to change them. So in terms of the technology decision that we have done, I think that we were right. Maybe timing, as I told you, and timing in the investment, tuning in a different way the investment. And the other things are more human factor related to decision about organization and attitude from one country to another. And but well, it was a great journey in any case.
It certainly was. I like this idea of faster and slower, and in some sense, it kind of describes what industry pundits will or how they describe the industrial Internet of Things in some sense, right? It's you sometimes you need to be faster to get your technology out there, but the reality is that this industry moves very slowly. So it's that fine balance in one hand of being very well tied into the technology, the IT technology, if you will, as you guys did. On the other hand, serving an industry, defense, military, industrial, that moves at a certain pace, and certainly slower than the processor leaps that happen on the IT side, right? And so in some sense, you probably manage that balance pretty well, and across a global audience, as you said as well. I know we joked a bit earlier about pervasive computing, but really reflecting on today's discussions about edge computing, Industry 4.0, autonomous vehicles, on and on, it seems like we are actually closer to this vision today than clearly we had been. Has the timing of this progression surprised you? I.e., did you expect things to move faster? And I guess at the same point, what do you see in store for us in this digital industry space over the next 5 years as well?
Yeah, exactly. My surprise is that the adoption from the industrial sector, it's lower than the adoption in the consumer space. And that's one thing that surprised me on a negative way. Digital transformation is still in the early day. If you think about digital transformation in the industrial sector, especially on the business model that the digitization will bring into the space. So to me, in the next 5 years, I think that, at least from my view about the future, I think that we will see this adoption of IoT really taking place with the AI, but the AI at the edge, this edge concept, it's really interesting, especially if you think about the next step on the AI as unsupervised AI and federated AI that can solve a lot of privacy issue that the industrial sector may have. And again, the 5G revolution because of the distributed capability of the 5G network. So in the next 5 years, I expect that what I have seen in the last 5 years will become a reality, and so it will be fun because it is not just a matter what it is interesting to me. It is not more just a matter of technology. It's about our sustainability problem, how to solve with technology the sustainability problem that the planet has, how to get out of the industrial model in order to enter in the digital model and in the service industry as a whole. So that's it's the new promises of these technologies, and I think that the planet can really enter in a new phase of growth, in a new phase of sustainable growth, thanks to the digital transformation.
And as you said, that digital transformation is still relatively early. So while you've finished out phase one of your professional career in terms of 30 years at Eurotech and handing over to the next generation of leadership, I'm sure everybody's thinking the same thing. What's next for you, Roberto?
Well, I'm still working on it. I have many ideas. And during this period, I will sort out which is the best for me. I'm really investigating all this new frontier of the quantum computing. That's the next edge in terms of computation, and also this, as I told you, this new digital transformation in terms of how we can serve with the technology the planet in a better way, and how we can help the new generations to create a more sustainable industrial infrastructure. So, well, we will see in the next month. I will see also myself in the next month, but for sure, many ideas.
And I like the fact that on your profile, you describe it as a sabbatical. Lord knows, after 30 years, you deserve at least a month or two of sabbatical.
Yes. 9 months up to the end of the year.
Okay, very good. Well, finally, the question I always like to ask is, where do you find your personal inspiration?
Well, I can tell you that one of the books that gave to me a lot of inspiration, it's The Singularity is Near from Ray Kurzweil. That's explain all these exponential technologies. And I think that all the people and all the online stuff that are discussing the exponential technologies are a good starting point that let you to think in a different way, because we are linear in some way as human, and we do not understand that the potential of the technologies because of how our mindset is built up. But at least looking at this kind of books and people, you can think in a different way. Like, for instance, the book from Peter Diamandis, Abundance. There are great books about how to think in a different way, how digital technologies are transforming the planet. And then if you think about the new way to build up a sustainable planet is the performance economy from Walter Stile. That is an interesting book about the servitization and the service industries. And so then why not some book about quantum technologies? Because, the quantum theory was in some way written down in the early of the last century, and it's still not yet so present inside the industrial sector, and we can get a lot of benefit from the usage of quantum technologies in the industrial sector. And the next 20, 30 years, I think that there will be a flourish of these things and helping the planet to continue to grow and in a sustainable way.
I think your definition or balance of these books, one foot in technology, one foot really in I'll call it social impact in this case, as you talk about the planet and such, really is a defining element of, I think, what you've done, over your career. And The Singularity is Near is one of my favorite books. I consider that a real inspiration.
Right.
And interesting enough, still a lot of it still has yet to come in terms of the predictions that are there. Yep. Absolutely. And that does give you a sense that while the singularity is near, it's still a ways away. That's the opportunity for all of us. So,
yes.
Roberto, thank you for spending this time with us today.
Thank you, Ken. It was a pleasure.
As well. So this has been Roberto Siagri, the founder and recent CEO of Eurotech, and truly a full stack pioneer. Thank you for listening, and please join us next week for the next episode of our Digital Thread podcast series. Thank you and have a great day. You've been listening to the Momenta Digital Thread podcast series. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion, and as always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please check our website at momenta.one for archived versions of podcasts, as well as resources to help with your digital industry journey. Thank you for listening.